The observations highlighted by Harper and applied to, quote, Negroes, unquote, as the term was then used in the United States, were the following. Quote number 5. Their character is summed up by the travelers quoted. The few opportunities we have had of studying their characters induces us to believe that they are a simple, honest, inoffensive, but weak, timid, and cowardly race. They seem to have no social tenderness, very few of those amiable private virtues which could win our affections, and none of those public qualities that claim respect or command admiration. The love of country is not strong enough in their bosoms to incite them to defend it against a despicable foe. And of the active energy, noble sentiments, and contempt of danger which distinguishes the North American tribes and other savages, no traces are to be found among this slothful people. Regardless of the past, as reckless of the future, the present alone influences their actions. In this respect, they approach nearer to the nature, the brute creation, than perhaps any other people on the face of the earth. End of quote. I suggest you take time to analyze such extracts. A few ideas, though. Apparently here, blacks were not capable of human white emotions and sentiment. This was already found more or less in Jefferson's notes on the state of Virginia. This would also be used by pro-slavery defenders to justify or downplay the cruelty of tearing apart families, which was at the heart of the institution of slavery. Second, blacks, unlike Indians, lacked in nobility of sentiment. Third, we can see here how their primitiveness is stressed, as they are thought to be nearer to the nature and the brute creation. In other passages, the comparison between blacks and Indians favored the former, only inasmuch as slavery had contributed to civilizing black people. Again, we find Chancellor Harper using the example of the West Indian Negro, quoting from another source, again possibly a travel narrative, and comparing with the Negro under slavery in the United States. This is quote number 6. The wild savage, that is the Indian, is the child of passion, unaided by one ray of religion or morality to direct his course, in consequence of which his existence is stained with every crime that can debase human nature to a level with the brute creation. Who can say that the slaves in our colonies are such? Are they not, by comparison with their still savage brethren, enlightened beings? Is not the West Indian Negro, therefore, greatly indebted to his master for making him what he is, for having raised him from the state of debasement in which he was born, and placed him in a scale of civilized society? It was a useful and beneficent work, approaching the heroic, to tame the wild horse and subdue him to the use of man. How much more to tame the nobler animal that is capable of reason and subdue him to usefulness. End of quote. Here we find the comparison with the Indian, the child of passion, which is actually in favor of the Negro, because the Negro has been civilized, contrary to the Indian. We also find a common theme, which is the comparison with animals and the taming of wild horses. Third point, here Chancellor Harper suggests the heathen status of Africans, from which they should be raised by their masters. The portraits of African slaves in these texts and in the imagery derived were evidently destined to rebuke the assertions of immediate abolitionists. In the 1830s, with the importance of the Second Great Awakening, abolitionists considered slavery a sin which had to be extirpated immediately, while owners should repent their sins, hence stressing the need for America overall to repent and purify itself. Pro-slavery defenders, Southerners mostly, also reacted to several events that had provoked great racial fears and phobia, in particular the successful Haitian Revolution of 1791, which had overthrown the slave regime in Santo Domingo and established an independent nation governed by men of color. More generally speaking, insurrections were also taking shape in North America. Nat Turner's in 1831, Denmark Vesey's failed rebellion in 1822, or Gabriel's insurrection in 1800. In spite of what pro-slavery advocates seem to believe, however, the number of slave insurrections in North America never came near to equaling the number of such insurrections in the Caribbean. These fears gave birth to the stereotype of the madman, based on such figures as Vesey or Nat Turner, the radical, bloodthirsty fanatic. Let's turn to an account of the trial of Denmark Vesey, entitled A Narrative of the Conspiracy and Intended Insurrection amongst a Portion of the Negroes in the State of South Carolina in the year 1822. In this text, we find the description of some of the men who joined Denmark Vesey's conspiracy. Extract quote number 7. Rolla was plausible and possessed uncommon self-possession. Bold and ardent, he was not to be deterred from his purpose by danger. Ned's appearance indicated that he was a man of firm nerves and desperate courage. Gula Jack was regarded as a sorcerer and as such feared by the natives of Africa who believe in witchcraft. He was not only considered invulnerable, he was artful, cruel, bloody. His disposition, in short, was diabolical. His influence amongst the Africans was inconceivable. Monday was firm, resolute, discreet, and intelligent. End of quote. We should note that here the portraits are actually diversified, some of which seem to laud the characters who joined Denmark Vesey's conspiracy. I would like to draw your attention to the character of Gula Jack, because his portrayal actually underlines one idea that Africans loved superstitions, which again was a way of claiming their inferiority. Superstition being opposite to reason and rationale. Later in the same account, we find in a footnote a portrait of Denmark Vesey. Quote, "He has been working as a carpenter in this city, distinguished for great strength and activity. Among his color, he was always looked up to with awe and respect. His temper was impetuous and domineering in the extreme, qualifying him for despotic rule, of which he was ambitious. All his passions were ungovernable and savage, and to his numerous wives and children he displays the haughty and capricious cruelty of an Eastern Bashal." Again, his accomplice Gula Jack is described at the moment when he hears his conviction to death. Quote, "Until he saw the witnesses and heard the testimony as it progressed against him, when in an instant his countenance was lighted up as if by lightning, and his wildness and vehemence of gesture and the malignant glance with which he eyed the witnesses who appeared against him, all indicated the savage, who indeed had been caught but not tamed." Another type in such texts was the happy-go-lucky black man, which would develop into Stanley Elkin's Sambo figure. The happy-go-lucky black man, or Sambo, is content with his lot. He is buoyant in, quote, happy abandon. In the following lines, still taken from the pro-slavery argument, Gilmore Simms attempted in 1837 to rebuke the writings of Englishwoman Harriet Martineau upon her travels to the United States. Quote number 9. Thus, when Dr. Lardner was in this country and on a visit to Carolina, he found himself forced to wonder at the exceeding comfort and great cheerfulness and contentment of the Negro. He freely admitted that nowhere were the laboring classes better, if so well treated, as our slaves. Their sprightliness particularly commanded his notice, their buoyancy and happy abandon. End of quote. Here we find a distorted image of slaves who apparently did not suffer one bit from their condition as slaves. We also find the largely developing paternalism of Southern slaveholders who use these images to defend slavery against the attacks of immediatist abolitionists.